everyone. Good afternoon. On behalf of the entire TCI organization, we want to say thank you for taking the time to join us virtually today. We know it's a big deal, especially as some of us are really zoomed out, as they say. Anyway, welcome to the 17th Annual Commonwealth Institute Leadership Luncheon, as we've renamed it Leadership Live, given our virtual circumstances. My name is Tammy Blanco, and I'm on the advisory board and the finance chair of the Commonwealth Institute of South Florida, and soon moving into the co-chair role. We have many sponsors joining us today who have made this day possible. And before I go any further, I'd like to take some time to thank them, not only for their support and contribution for today specifically, but also for their support in furthering women and their success in business. I'd like to thank our presenting sponsor, Bank of America, and our contributor sponsor, Ryder Systems. I'd also like to thank our supporter sponsors, Bacardi, John Hardy, Kaufman Rawson, Linda Pereski and Tony Randolph, the Miller Foundation, the Miller Family Foundation, as well as Starwood Property Trust. And of course, all of our generous friends and table sponsors whose names are visible on the screen and on the event program. As I've learned more about each of our sponsors, it is clear that their primary goal, like that of TCI, is to attract women and develop them through providing tools and programs to drive successes and help career advancement. Supporting women in business is not just good for the soul, it's good for business too. I've been part of the TCI board for a few years, and so for those of you who don't know of our organization as well, I thought I'd walk you through who we are and what we do. And for those of you who do know, I hope you'll bear with me for just a few more minutes. We were founded in Boston over 20 years ago by a group of incredibly forward-thinking entrepreneurs in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, hence the name, the Commonwealth Institute. These women were looking for a cohort of other like-minded women to form their tribe. Each knew walking the roads less traveled was lonely, yet rewarding, and each knew it would have been so much better had they been able to do it together. These women wanted to make it better for the next generation of women, business leaders, and themselves, and they did. Over the years, in collaboration with our colleagues in Boston, we have taken their vision and have continued to grow and develop here in South Florida. We operate on a coexisting platform. We offer a general membership or an enhanced membership for those who also participate in one of our executive forums. All of our members take advantage of our year-long monthly programming, focusing on skills that companies and employees value, like leading through challenging times, or developing emotional intelligence, or fostering social responsibility, and also building your leadership toolkit. We host book clubs, which we call Beyond the Book and Coffee. This year, they've been virtual. Typically, in the past, they were in person, probably likely to be virtual a little bit longer into 2021. And we also have always hosted virtual talks for those who can't leave their desks, but we're still interested in participating. And we've covered topics from executive presence online to leadership resilience. We also run a Strategies for Success training program over 4 days for high potential women leaders. In this highly effective, highly competitive program, we focus on both career ownership and personal development. This program also carries a benefit of being assigned to an existing TCI leader as a personal mentor, with the intention of this being the first of many helpful relationships built as part of TCI. For those who are ready for their own board of directors, we also offer executive forums. These are groups of up to 10 women with diverse set of skills and led by personal coaches. They meet for several hours monthly, acting as others' personal board of directors. So I'm sure you'd agree, after hearing all of that, TCI is a place where women of all levels come together to learn, to grow, to mentor, to be mentored, and to support other women along their professional journeys. So if any of the programs sound interesting, please just let us know. We can provide membership information for you to join, or just additional information on any of our other programming. And if that isn't good enough, to tie all of this up with a beautiful bow, for the next 24 hours, anyone joining as a general member will receive a $50 discount plus 1 hour of executive coaching with our current co-president, Lindy Smiley, which is basically valued at $300. We would love to add you to our network. And last, but certainly not least, I must say that events like today and throughout the year would not be possible without the leadership and hard work of our advisory board and our small but certainly mighty staff, Lori K. Davis, our executive director, and Jessica Payne, our programming and membership manager. So thank you all for all that you do. And now, without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce you to the moderator of today's program, Katie Kemper. I'll tell you a little bit about her, and then Katie will introduce our special guest, Gabby Reece, to begin their conversation. So Katie Kemper is an entrepreneur. She is the founder of Kempner Communications, a high-end consultancy specializing in creative and corporate communications, reputation and brand management, media training, content creation, and crisis communications. Prior to founding her own firm in 2015, she spent 18 years running global communications. Katie is the creator and host of Perspectives with Katie Kemper, a long-running digital series that focuses on successful working women balancing busy lives, something a few of us may know a little bit about. Katie has produced Perspectives in partnership with TED Women, the Cannes Lions Festival, Advertising Week, The Guardian, the 3% Conference, and the Huffington Post, among others, and has interviewed hundreds of remarkable businesswomen, including Ariana Huffington, Martha Stewart, documentary filmmaker and the first partner of California, Jennifer Siebel Newsom, also rock legend Joan Jett, chef and entrepreneur Rachel Ray, and numerous CEOs, company founders, and media thought leaders. A frequent industry speaker, moderator, and host, Katie is homegrown. She is a graduate of the University of Miami and lives in Miami Beach with her husband, 2 dogs, and son and daughter when they're home from college, of course. So now, I welcome Katie Kemper and Gabby Reece to our virtual stage.
So welcome. This is amazing. Doing it virtually is terrific. This is the 8th year, I think, that I have had the honor of talking with all of you and interviewing amazing women. And this perhaps is an interview that I'm most excited for. I've interviewed Gabrielle Reece before, and she is a powerhouse. Normally, I don't like to read too long bios, but I think it's important for you to know a little bit about Gabby before we jump into the conversation. Gabby is not only a volleyball legend, but she's an inspirational leader, a New York Times bestselling author, wife, and mother. She's a former professional beach volleyball player and Nike's first female spokeswoman, and she's the definition of both athleticism and beauty. She's the creator of HiX, co-founder of XPT, and executive member of Laird Superfood, and she's dedicated to building and leading health and fitness methods. I went to UM. Gabby won an athletic scholarship to Florida State University, where she played 2 seasons before accepting offers from the modeling world and becoming a highly sought-after model. She was only a sophomore at FSU when Elle named her one of the 5 most beautiful women in the world. And she's graced the cover of Sports Illustrated for women, Travel and Leisure Golf, Women's Sports and Fitness, Elle, Shape, Self, Harper's Bazaar, Vogue, People, and she's among many others. She's worked with the most elite photographers in the world. Despite all of the demands of modeling and competing, she became a professional volleyball player, and in 1994, she became Nike's first female athlete to design a shoe, Nike's first ever female cross-training spokesperson, and her shoe eventually became the first women's shoe to outsell the Air Jordan. Her most recent book, which I very much encourage you to read, it's terrific, is My Foot is Too Big for the Glass Slipper. It's a New York Times bestseller where she shares her personal stories and real life ups and downs of motherhood and a career in order to encourage women worldwide to challenge traditional norms and find personal happiness. She's also had a very impressive television career on being on MTV as a host and The Extremist with Gabby Reece. Then she's also co-hosted The View. She's been on Good Morning America, The Today Show, The Ellen DeGeneres Show, Chelsea Lately, Dr. Oz. She's also been in several feature films. She's married to the love of her life, big wave surfer Laird Hamilton, and she has 3 children, two together with her husband, and she lives both in Malibu and Kauai, Hawaii. So Gabby, welcome.
Hi. I think we used all the time up and on that.
I know. And let me say, that was way edited down.
That just shows you how long I've been around, because it's really not about there's been so much work. I've just been doing this a long time. Hi, everyone.
Well, it's an honor to get to talk with you again. And let me just start by asking you, where are you right now?
I just came to Kauai. We actually did most of our COVID in California. And now that it's big wave season, the same low pressures that bring snow bring large waves. And so in order to keep the family peace, we came to Kauai so Laird could get in the ocean, and nobody's complaining that we're here, but that's where I am.
And how are you?
Me, I'm good. I think the question of how someone is, I sort of feel like, especially during times like this, when you have a job and you have a roof over your head and everybody's healthy, I think a person, should recognize that they're doing pretty good.
Yeah, I definitely agree. This has been an incredible 24 hours for me personally, because yesterday I interviewed Rachel Ashwell, the founder of Shabby Chic. Last night, my close friend, my best friend, Kim, invited me to a launch of Ina Garten's new cookbook. And now we're talking with you. And the one thing, as I was thinking about, being around and talking with 3 really tremendous women in such a short period of time, I was thinking about how interesting it is that each of you have really been able to focus on your passion and what you excel at and build these terrific careers from it. And I wonder if we could sort of start by talking about how you decide what you are going to focus on through your career.
I think it's really, first of all, I always say it really starts with who we are individually. I think it's really easy, and even more so now, because there's certainly more white noise than like when I was coming up, that you keep doing that personal check-in to identify, like, is this something that represents me? Is this something that I could work at when it's not going well? Because, any entrepreneur knows that the majority of the time, it's certainly in the beginning, it's not about going well. It's about, like, you're doing the heavy lifting and you're laying down the tracks and things like that. So I think for me, I grew up in the Virgin Islands, and there was something about maybe growing up that way where you had the space to understand who you are and then make decisions based off of that. Like, if something really hits you in an off way, not to ignore that. And then going forward, like, let's say once your career is kind of rolling, that you're in that, but then you're also kind of doing the 1 year, 3 year, and 5 year look ahead in this idea of, this is who I am today, but also hopefully the idea would be that I change and grow, and I don't want to get stuck doing the same thing over and over. And so how do I make who I'm becoming also start to match or reflect in my business? And then also you can be as strategic as you want. And then let's not ignore the fact that I believe when we follow our instincts and we really are willing to work hard and do the extra and create the value, that the answers get brought to our path, and sort of the good luck, if you will. So I'm not going to say I'm not a real, and I involve, blessings and luck as part of that formula based on, your kind of your work.
So what are you, that's a great way to look at it. What are you focusing on? Is there one thing that you're specifically focusing on right now? Is it Laird Superfoods? Just looking, just following you on Instagram, I'm tired. So.
Well, listen, I'm always focusing on the fundamentals, and that starts really with my well-being and my health. And so I will say that regardless of what's going on out there, I'm very clear to always, and that doesn't mean I have tons of time. Some days it's 15 minutes. That's what it is. You're lucky if that's what you have, right? People will say, I don't have time for that. For me, that's an essential. So when you say, what am I focusing on? I'm always focusing on the fundamentals, and then, the care of my family, the care of my relationship, and then outward from there. In my businesses, we have, we were fortunate. We just took Laird Superfood public in late September, which was a first time for Laird and I. We've had a graveyard of businesses and some that have kind of trucked along. We have another business, XPT, which is kind of the fitness arm of our business, which you can imagine during this time has to adapt and sort of create a different strategy. So those are the, sort of the organized businesses. But then there's weirdly, as Laird and I is both, and I'm going to put it in air quotes, as talent, right? You have to feed that beast a little bit because it gives you leverage in your other businesses, right? Like this idea of getting attention for attention's sake is kind of silly. What you start to learn is, how do I artfully keep those things going so you're relevant enough so you have choices, but you're strategic? Because at the end of the day, people go, well, it's good exposure. Well, exposure for what? At my age and at this time, you start to go, well, how do I monetize that? Because the idea of exposure is a slippery slope for exposure's sake. So, I'm always kind of trying to make sure we're doing enough of that stuff that is genuine to who we are. So we keep having those choices, and we do support those businesses. And then, I have a podcast, which I really enjoy because it's a platform for me to continue to learn and grow and expand on, because I think that's really important, because you can get locked in, right? Like, especially if you've had any version of success, you can really lock in and just do that. And then you look up one day and you're out of touch and you're behind.
So there's so many things there I want to ask you about. I have to figure out where I want to start. I think I'd love to just ask you first about when you said, you really as a brand, and not doing promotion just for promotion's sake. You have a great Instagram that, I see a lot of famous people and are liking all of your posts. And you put up a nice mix of things from your podcast and yourself and your career. What other things do you do besides Instagram to continue your brand, or is it mainly there?
And I'm of that generation. It's not intuitive to me. And so I'll be honest with you, this is something I'm always fighting with, because quite frankly, I try to do it as genuinely as I can. It's like this weird line of, you're going to be honest, but you're not going to be gratuitous, right? And it's this weird line. And then Laird and I as a couple, and my family and all these things. So I try to just make sure it feels good to me when I see it. It feels like like if you met me 5 minutes later, you wouldn't be like, oh, that's so different. But I don't like it. I'm probably not good at it. I just do it the best that I can. I think I'm a good communicator, but I actually think that that's a different art form than the skill set that I have. So I'm trying to always bridge that. Laird won't even do social media. So I choose to do his social media. And that's always interesting to try to capture his voice and honor him. But that's really one of the only ways besides, cross, marketing. So doing other people's podcasts or interviews and things like that, which is a much more comfortable way for me to sort of feed that beast. But it certainly is, a lesson for me, because I do feel like there's a lot to learn there.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about your podcast a little bit. It's, can you tell us about it?
Yeah, it's called the Gabby Reece Show. I know it's original. And, the whole thing for me was, I've met a lot of high performance people, whether they're business people, and they're billionaires, or they're athletes and they're, Super Bowl champions or whatever. I've met a lot of people that are called champions. And my whole thing is, once I got into this idea of high performance, first in sport and then in, self-care, we have 3 daughters, and I started looking at real life, because that's the thing that actually interests me the most, because I spend a lot of time in real life. was, okay, great. We have all this high performance. I have a lot of techniques and a lot of information about high performance. How do we use those experiences to perform actually in our everyday real life? Because for me, that's the stuff that you don't fake. You can't phone in. That's the stuff that impacts your health, the health of your relationships, your well-being, and ultimately your performance and how, and how well you perform. So I sort of thought I'd like to reverse engineer the conversations with, I have scientists, I have athletes, I have all kinds of people on there, and get them to give me the information, the high, that sharp end of the stick information, but also say to them, okay, but you in your everyday life, what keeps you awake? How do you use those techniques into your, with your relationships with your partner, or what do you struggle with as a parent? Because I think when you talk about high performance, it's wonderful. I love it. But if we can all figure out also how to navigate real life just a little better, or even just hearing that other people go through the same battles, I think is liberating. So I kind of try to keep the podcast living in those areas, not just, we've got it figured out, here's your list of 10 things, because at the end of the day, there's a lot of people to tell you that.
Well, I think especially right now, people that are working women, the women that are listening today, that are trying to balance so many things. And, many women are also having to deal with working and schooling their kids. Most of them are doing that from home. Everything is it's a pressure cooker. I don't have to say it, it's obvious. But are there some of the techniques from these very high performance people that we might use, others of us might use in our everyday lives?
Absolutely. I think if we could just say this, if we could really always start with perspective. Why we get overwhelmed is we lose our footing on our own perspective. And so, it's as simple as sometimes saying like, oh, I'm walking around just reacting. I go through this myself, where all of a sudden I'm almost in the cycle, the unconscious cycle of just reacting, instead of, okay, I'm going to stop, I'm going to gain my perspective, and I'm going to look at what's really worth reacting to. And it's not much. And so how do I get myself in a position where I always say, just back off the ledge a little bit and operate from that backed off position. And that's why I drill down so much on self-care, because training for me, or eating healthy, or trying to get to sleep, has everything to do with just armoring up so I can handle my business, my kids, my marriage. And when I say handle, I mean in the way that I'm hoping I do. I blow it all the time, but you still have this, idea of how you're trying to be. And I think we can't get there if we don't feel good. So, that's why I'm always hammering down about the self-care. And it doesn't mean hours and hours every day. It doesn't mean never having a slice of pizza. It just means overall our lifestyle is such that it supports us as human beings, and then go from there. I call it the flywheel. A lot of times people, especially women, we look at it as buckets. Well, my buckets even is my family, my relationship, my work. Do I have equal chips? It just doesn't work like that. And every person in business will talk about the flywheel. Does my work and the way it makes me feel support the way I am as a mother? And are the relationships with my children, feeding my marriage in some way, or vice versa, usually, and using it that way. And also realizing, hey, I need to, I'm going to shut the computer off and I'm going to focus on kid number 2 because something's going on there. And just recognizing, hey, the kids are going to get neglected today. We had a great family day yesterday. I have to really drill down on work. And so with women, we're always apologetic. We're always feeling like we're falling short. And I always say it's like perspective, having a practice that supports you, because we all have the information. We just don't do the practice. And that realizing that, perfection probably isn't the goal. So why are we apologizing that we're not perfect? So for me, those are some of the ways I try to help myself with that. And I check in a lot with myself, like, hey, what's off? And try to deal with it sooner than later.
So exercise your body. This is a big part of who you are, you know, as a professional athlete. And for people, for women that maybe don't have the time or don't have the interest or whatever it is to be quite as hardcore as you are. Are there some things, though, that you could recommend to work into your life?
Yeah. And I think, listen, it's interesting. Women will get their nails done and they'll do everything. We've placed a lot of value on certain practices, you know, grooming, things like that. And when, you know, I know people see me and they go, oh, that there's no way. And I'm not talking about being hardcore. I'm talking about movement of any kind, walking. Like, this is a real thing. However, the number one way we can support ourselves besides within our spirit, because I don't care if you're eating perfect and you're training like a, you know, like a lunatic. If your spirit's off and you're wound tight, it's off anyway. It doesn't matter. So let's start there. Let's start with, that's why I say perspective. And then the other part is everything we put in our mouth, that you can talk to any person who really knows and understands about exercise and nutrition. And when you get to a certain level, what we put in our mouth is the king or queen. It just is. So booze, you know, simple carbs, processed foods. If you really want to support yourself, and it's not about a denial, but it's about 80% of the time eating real whole food, period. And if you're stressed out, and I understand, you know, everyone goes, oh, a glass of wine. If you want to really get into the science, when they say it's good for you, it's 4 ounces. It's not your friend. So it's like we have to find other ways to kind of round it out. All this stuff, the accumulation, I call it. If you're doing something habitually that isn't supporting you, in the end, you have to get rid of it. So for me, it's really understanding if they're not interested in exercise or they don't have time, which is total nonsense. Because how much time, if I looked at their computer time, their social media time, whatever time, they've got 30 minutes in there, is what you're putting in your mouth. So, you know, it's also getting into a relationship with, like, when I grab that, is it because I want to enjoy it, or is it because I'm stressed out, I'm bored, or I'm lonely? And so it's really having that other relationship with what we're putting in our mouths. And it's also belief. You know, sometimes I think, you know, I'm 50 years old and I think people go like, oh, well, I'm this age now, so I'm this. Forget that. You are who you are. And it doesn't mean I'm not fighting being 50, but I'm not going to be defined like, oh, no, I'm 50. What does that mean? You know? And so I think it's also getting out of those narratives that limit us from just being the best us, at whatever time in our life that is.
Well, let's talk about that, because when you and I spoke on my podcast, we talked about both of us turning 50 this year during the pandemic. In business,
I turned 50 before the pandemic. I'm
older than the pandemic. Okay, I actually turned it in the pandemic and didn't get to go on my trip, but we're 50 now, and 50 to me, when I would have heard that number, you know, years ago, in my 20s, I would have been like, okay, well, that is a true old person, and I don't feel old. But the flip side, in business, for a lot of women, there is this underlying ageism of getting older, especially in certain careers, right?
Okay. Like, what career would age work against you?
Advertising, like branding. That
makes sense.
People are expecting, like the young creative, definitely in entertainment. But I'm just wondering, you know, what is your feeling on that now? Is it? I feel like it's different now. Being 50 or being a certain age doesn't necessarily carry the same stigma that it used to.
You know what it is? You know, they have to talk about something. We create all these weird things out in the, you know, whether it's culturally, societally, you know, media, whatever. This is why I say it's about our own perspective. How do you feel when you wake up? Are you full of energy and vitality? Are you interested? Are you curious? Are you ready to work hard? And my thing is yes, it is a new world in certain ways from the way that my brain was hardwired, but that's why I'm engaged and I'm trying to continue to learn, because the other side of that is having experience it is valuable to bring to the table. And also I believe as you get older as a woman, your communication skills become better. I think you have an opportunity to be a better kind of boss, if you will, because this idea of like trying to please everybody starts to go away. This idea of, I just think you get better at it. You have more experience, right? So I never really thought about it. And imagine, I came from professional sports and at one time I was in fashion. So those are two really brutally age limiting professions. And for me, it was like, oh, I lived in those matrices to learn those lessons. And now I'm in a different place. And I think my value is based on how hard I still want to work, how interested I am, how open-minded I am, and how willing I am also to start sometimes at the bottom. You know, I've been pretty successful at a couple things, and I have no problem going like, oh, I'm at the bottom of this ladder, no problem.
Well, I'm not sure that you're exactly the norm in everything, because you're very you're super energetic and is super,
I have 3 daughters. Okay. I get my ass kicked on a regular basis. I have been in the same relationship for 25 years. Do you think every day was perfect or every year we were together? I think I'm fortunate this way, but sports also help me. Sometimes we have to make decisions on how we want to feel. I know it's counterintuitive, but I can't get to how I want to feel sometimes by just feeling it. I sometimes have to decide and then try to work my way to the feeling, because if I'm left up to my feelings, sometimes I might just stay in bed, pull the covers over and be like, oh, I'm not dealing with it today. So I think that has been something that has been really helpful.
Well, let's talk about you being a working mom and your kids. You write about that, and you write about your marriage in your book. Mm-hmm. How has it been for you during this time trying to balance everything? Because, I'm sure how old are your kids?
My kids are bigger. I have a grown daughter. My husband, I inherited one daughter who was a baby. Now she's 25. I have my 17-year-old and my 12-year-old daughter. So I'm in the thick of something else. Like, I don't have little kids I'm having to homeschool. I'm with serious teenagers.
Yes. And mine are a little bit bigger. It's a whole other thing also then too. So you talk about what you eat and, being careful about what you eat. And I'd love to talk a little bit about your company with your husband, Laird Superfoods. Mm-hmm. You guys went public during a pandemic. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, I think if you want to know the business side of why we tactically were able to do it, first of all, I think what we didn't want to do was, focus on a couple SKUs, take VC money, and then have to sell. What we wanted to do was keep control, because creatively, ingredients, we have a clean label. And actually, Laird quite enjoys. We were hoping to bring very exclusive products in an inclusive way. So we're vertically integrated. We have our own factory. We only have one small line of 3 products because we don't do liquid yet. So that's the only thing that we co-pack. Everything is vertically integrated. So that's number one, why we survived the pandemic. And the reason that we went public was because we do want to keep that control, and we had to sort of do one or the other. Mm-hmm. And so I will say that it was an extraordinary experience to go through a road show on Zoom, which at first you're like, oh, and then you realize how efficient it is. Like, you're sitting there with your grown-up shirt and you're talking about, margins and, all kinds of things, but you're sitting, in your sweatpants and barefoot. And so literally we could get 35 1-hour Zooms done in a week. All that was a really positive experience, but I learned a lot. The fact that our product is native digital really made it realistic for us, in this new day and age. And I will say this to any business person: if you have anything that you're doing that lives in the ESG, like environmental and social and governances environment. There is so much money out there for you, because there's portfolios out there that just have funds allocated to that. They almost don't even care what it is. So I would encourage people, what's so beautiful about new modern business practices is that everyone is considering, does it have a positive environmental, social, or governance's impact? And how can we support businesses that are doing that? And so you're seeing more and more of like this, conscious business and conscious commerce. And if you want to ask me what did I hear over and over on the 100 calls that really became very evident, was that there's money there for people who want to practice business and be viable, but also be conscious. So I would encourage people that amplify those parts of your business for sure.
Yeah, I mean, from a point of view of having a PR firm that works with big businesses, that's what they're looking for too. What is their purpose, and and how are they going to translate it into what they do? So that's an excellent point. On a funner side, or a lighter side, I was looking at some of the foods and recipes, and the vanilla chai latte looks great. What's some of your favorite stuff there? I don't know. It looks pretty appealing to me.
Yeah. Oh, you mean, at Laird Superfood?
Yeah.
What are that? I mean, we have a lot of really interesting products. We have a hot chocolate for kids, but there's mushroom in it and they don't know, and you can't taste it. The other thing we have in all of our drinks have to be functional. So besides having a clean label, we'll slip in mushrooms. We have a plant-based protein that's out that has really incredible ingredients, so it won't upset your stomach. We've got hydrate products. This I really appreciate because it's only 70 cents a serving, and it's freeze-dried coconut, so you can add it to your water, but it also has minerals in it. So it makes it more affordable, but yet we haven't lost any of the nutrition. So there's a lot of different things. We're starting to get into healthy whole food snacks and things like that. So it's really a lot of fun.
Seems like it. What do you splurge on food-wise? You mentioned that a tiny bit before. You said pizza, no wine. No wine? No wine? No pizza?
I'm not an alcohol girl.
But pizza?
Occasionally, only if it's good though. I'm not going to mess around with some delivery pizza. Like if we're going to an Italian place and it's happening, I'll eat it. For sure. Like life is short. My husband doesn't eat it because he doesn't really want it. Mm-hmm. But if I want it, I'll eat it. But the other thing that happens is the more healthy you kind of eat, the less of those kinds of cravings you have. So that ends up becoming an interesting cycle where you're like, people are like, oh, I can't believe you're self-control. It's like, yeah, I don't really want it. So I think that's part of it too.
I think that might also be getting older a little bit, because I used to have a sweet tooth and it totally went away. I don't know why. So, but I do. But
if we eat enough healthy fats, especially females, we won't crave sugar as much. Or if we eat the right, kinds of protein, people don't realize that that's also what's happening.
So I wanted to just ask you something that from a while ago, but it just seemed like it'd be interesting for us to all hear about this. Can you tell us about when you designed a Nike shoe?
Well, that's called good timing. I got there at the right time, and they were ready to do something with a female, and I stepped into not volleyball, but into training, which is obviously a bigger category. I was fortunate. They assigned a designer to me, or me to a designer, Tinker Hatfield, who was responsible for all the Jordans. But it was a really fun process, because what you realize about Nike and why they are successful, especially in the footwear, is that they really genuinely listen to the athletes. And if the athlete wants or doesn't want something in the shoe, they actually really do it. So, and I even said, this is kind of silly, but I have a big foot. I have a size 12 foot. And I said to Tinker at the end, I go, okay, performance and function wise, I wanted to do this, this, and this. But when I looked down at my foot, I wanted to look smaller. And so can you aesthetically put something in there? And so he did. So that was really good fun. And it was nice that it was successful. And that was really lucky.
So one of the things that talking about your big feet, only because that's the name of your book, or is in your book, one of the things that you're very honest with in your book and then also in your podcast is just when things aren't perfect. And, you know, I think now, especially with women, working women who are trying to do so many different things, as I said before, I mean, there's no way that can't be a theme of this year for a lot of women. You know, a lot of women just feel like they're falling down at certain things. And yeah. I think the fact that you're so honest about it is important in your book, but then on with everything else in the podcast, even on Instagram. You know, I saw one post that you said where like, this is what real life looks like, and this is what I look like all made up. And it's really important. Are there things that you do that really help keep you grounded and mentally focused?
Well, quite frankly, it's several different things. One is, you know, we call it not losing the plot. And I think sometimes when we take ourselves so seriously, and by the way, I take myself very seriously, like I have to watch that. Like and it's not that I take myself seriously. There's a part of me that's pretty serious. And so that can get you into trouble. So I'm always checking that, but that is why I train, because there's something stripped away about training. Like it's just you, there you are. You're not in a performance, and it's hard, and it's really important. I don't care who you are. And I'm not talking about the discomfort of stress from work or from family. I'm talking about like a kind of time under tension, real discomfort that we get to know ourselves. We get to be ourselves. We get to see ourselves, because sometimes we get so like, I'm a mom now. Oh, I'm in my business role. And okay. And I think sometimes we get trapped in that versus, okay, I'm going to peel everything away, and here I am, there I am. This is how I feel. And so for me, regrounding back to who am I, the basics, not this built up idea of who I am or who I'm supposed to be, is certainly very helpful. And then what happens is once you can take ownership of like, hey, this is how I am, this is me, the good, the bad, the ugly, this is my life, this is what's perfect and not perfect, whatever that means. I think you get a lot of power from that, and you don't even open up a dialogue for people to comment or, you know, family or friends about like what's going on with you. No one in my life, I don't want to say has that right. It's more about, I'm not living up to anyone else's expectation, because I'm like, this is how it is. And there's something liberating in that, and a place to work from, right? Like, oh, this needs some work over here because I'm identifying it. And so what happens is you actually make everything better by saying it's not perfect.
Yeah. I think things not being perfect, especially right now, is very good. You know, I mean, they never are.
This is the thing. I don't know where we got this idea that it's supposed to be perfect. Our butts are supposed to be perfect. Our bank accounts are supposed to be perfect. Our kids are supposed to be well behaved. It's like, when was that going to happen? Like, I have some of the most non-compliant children in the world, but what did I expect? And even though it is hard on me and I feel unsure and I get nervous and scared and angry and all the things that come with that, it's like, this is life. And we have to kind of be, if you want to talk about being a grown-up is realizing like, yeah, no, that's life. And COVID or not COVID, why would perfection ever be something I expect of myself or of you? That is ridiculous.
That's a good point. And also, I think, you know, when you're saying about being about parenting and then expecting anything to be perfect, you know, my kids are in their early 20s now, and sometimes I just look at them and I think to myself, I need that rule book or the grown up, you know, who's going to tell me what to do right now to make it perfect. And you're right, it's not going to be perfect. So let's just ask before we take some questions. I have two more things I want to ask you. The first is, and I hesitate to ask this because there are so many things, what's next for you?
Well, we're gonna keep our foot on the gas with Laird Superfood, and the whole thing is moving that to a food platform. Quite frankly, we use coffee and creamer as our base, but we are very focused on, you know, when you have the momentum, people go, oh, you went public. It's like, yeah, now it's time to get to work. So it'll be definitely focused on that. It will be making sure I'm doing the best job that I can as a parent to create a launching pad for my next two children, one who's getting ready, and then the 12-year-old, and see if I can extract the telephone from her eyeballs and hands. We'll see if I can do that. Yeah, you want to hear good parenting technique? Yesterday, I was so frustrated by the phone that I was like, you know what? I just think that's all you should do. I think you should go in your room and just be on your computer, on your phone. I don't think you should see friends. I don't think you should get outside. I just think that's what you should do. You should just live there. And she's like, maybe I will, So, I mean, I don't know, but it's to try my best to create a springboard for these girls. Try to, really crush it with Laird Superfood, tend to the garden of my marriage every day, because that doesn't happen on its own. That's like a real thing. That's talk about a practice. And I do that because I also know that if you are in a partnership with somebody that you really like, you're actually fortunate. So you should act like that. Even if you've been together a really long time and you know everything good and bad about them. Because also what I realize about that is when I do that, it is the thing that I want it to be. That's not going to happen on its own. Like, I wish you would, be kind and loving to me. If I tend to that garden, chances are I might make it something I want it to be. And right now, obviously I would personally, selfishly, because it's the thing that's really only mine, is with my podcast is, just do that as well as I can. Let the results take care of themselves, how many people listen or don't listen, but really focus on doing that the best that I can. And I usually think that that's the order of things. Worry about the work, and you always are strategic, but you're not going to control the outcome. So worry about the work.
Yeah. And just to build on that, before we open it up to questions, which please ask your questions in the Q&A box. Is there one piece of advice that has really helped get you to where you are today that you could share with all of us?
Well, I've had a lot of advice. I had a coach, my coach in college at Florida State, Cecile Renaud, who's still my friend, Dr. Cecile Renaud. She said to me once, and I didn't understand it. I was about 19 at the time. She called me in her office, and I was living this dual life of fashion and playing ball at school, and it was hard to do. And some of my teammates, they weren't always nice to me about that, and I understand. But she said to me, hey, I run this team, and the thing is that I have a commitment to what the goal for the team is. And you've got 12 girls, 6 to 8 play. So that means some people are unhappy. And she goes, I really do my best to focus on making those best decisions. And she goes, and then I know, she goes, at least one person will be happy. And she was like, me. And I think as a female, and if you want to be a female boss, there's something to be said for being comfortable with that very uncomfortable feeling. And the other thing I have learned too about leadership is this: you're not allowed to actually call yourself a leader. You can be in charge of a space, and the people in that space will decide if you're their leader or not based on how you act. And what I know the traits of all leaders is accountability, empathy, decisiveness. It doesn't mean other people can make decisions. It's somebody who can be decisive, and if they blow it because they're accountable, their course correct. So for me, I think that that's really important. If you like want to be a leader, those are the things you have to focus on, because you can't command that or demand that. And that's, I think, really, really important to know.
That's great. That's great advice. But I know other people want to ask you some questions too. And before we get to the submitted questions, I believe that Gabby Reece with Bank of America would like to ask you a question. So Gabby, will you come up on the stage to ask your question, please? There she is.
Hi, my name is Gabby Reece, and thank you, Gabby, for your honest advice and your comments. My question to you is, what has been your biggest challenge as a woman entrepreneur, and how do you overcome it?
Well, as a woman, I would say it's not unique. I think parenting has been the hardest and scariest thing, just because it is. And as an entrepreneur, it's just, I guess it's learning too, like when something isn't working, you know, that notion of like you're in the tunnel, the only way through is to continue forward. Well, there's sometimes in being an entrepreneur in business where you're like, you know what, this actually isn't going to work. You got to cut it. Those moments are hard for sure.
Thank you.
Okay, great. And now I know we have another question from Teresa Weintraub. So, Teresa? There she is.
Thank you, Gabby. I have a question. What advice would you have for young women who have been so passionate about sports, but not everybody is going to make it to the top ranks? But what advice do you have as they look, or even for those who are in the top ranks as they transition from sports to something else?
You know, I deal with I interact with a lot of young athletes that kind of, you know, go like, who am I now? And this whole thing of identity. I think I would say also it's really important for all of us to not be our identity. So if you're the CEO or you're the all-star or whatever, how do we release all of that actually? Because that is a prison in itself. And what I tell the athletes is you're a loaded gun. You just have to figure out what your next target is. And it's not about like, oh, weren't you that tennis player or weren't we? It's like, no, I'm me. And I can take all of this and redirect it at something new. And just to have that belief in yourself. And it's, you know, Ryan Holiday, who wrote Ego is the Enemy, talks about a body of evidence. And so it's not about that you're supposed to know how to do the new thing. It's that you have a body of evidence, that you have the ability to learn something and execute and to believe in that process.
Thank you.
Okay, we have time for one or two questions. So one question is, what do you wish you knew in your 30s?
Just don't take it personal. And when you have to make tough decisions that are unpopular or whatever, it's okay. People aren't going to love it. And it doesn't make you a bad person. I talk about this a lot. Making tough decisions and making decisions that make people unhappy doesn't make you a bad person. That's different. And as I think more hardwired men do it, it seems more easily than women. We're like, oh, they're mad at me, so am I a bad person? No, you're not. You have a job to do. And so I think that that's another part what's really super important. And I will say this, if you're going to do this in business, let's talk about in business. You have to be able to communicate sooner than when you're upset, because the problem women find themselves in is they get way up here and then they finally say what they feel. But now you're almost like out of control. So really, it's about communicating clearly and succinctly without having to get angry to finally say what you actually need to say.
So that's a really good point. Another question, and this was actually something I meant to ask you, is do you currently have a mentor?
I have a lot of mentors. I borrow. Cecile Renaud was one of them because she blended being caring and loving and a tough general very, very well. So I mimicked her. I've learned a lot through teaching classes in fitness where you have to be in charge of the space and you have to defend because there's so many people trying to, impact that. And it's not that they mean to do it negatively, but they will. So there'll be a time suck and all these things so I learned how to just it's not personal. I'm giving you information, which means if you are not going to be able to oblige what's happening here, you can just leave. It's okay, but you're going to have to leave. Like when you walk in the room, this is the rules of the room. And if you don't like that, it's cool. And then I do a lot of reading and a lot of listening to people that I find. I really like the thinking of like an Eric Weinstein podcast called The Portal. He's done a million other things. So Cecile was like a physical mentor. And I have a friend named Anya Fernald. She created Belcampo. It's a business and a farm, very hard. I just watch her and I'm inspired by the way she's blending her business skills and her creativity. And quite frankly, being married to my husband, there's a checks and balance being married to Laird that keeps me very, very grounded.
What are you currently reading? People want to know.
What am I reading? I was reading an awareness book by Anthony DeMello, and then I just bought a book by Margaret Wheatley on leadership. Actually, I'll get the title, because I thought she can be known also as Meg Wheatley. She's definitely worth checking out, because especially during this time, she just talks about when you do something, not because of the outcome, because it's the right thing to do. Mm-hmm. And I think right now that's really important. And I really believe that. It's like we have to do things. You don't want to be foolish. I'm not talking about being foolish, but if you're in pursuit of something and because it's the right thing to do, that has to be way in front of, well, what's the outcome? And so that is a book that I just started reading on leadership. Again, Margaret Wheatley. I finished a book called The Madness of Crowds, which, only if you're ready for it, by Douglas Murray. The Leadership and the New Science is the latest book I have. And The Madness of Crowds was pretty great.
Okay, so who wrote that?
Douglas Murray.
Last question is, could you just share quickly with us about a time in your career when you knew you had to do something different? You're very honest with yourself, and it would be great to know what made you realize that and what encouraged you to pivot.
Well, there's been a couple times I've done that. One time when I was in volleyball, my knees were really hurting, and I understood the limitation of the platform, and I was like in my 30s, and I was like, okay, I have to transition. But I always kind of knew that. We created a nutrition company probably 10 years ago or less, that after about 3 years, it was like, this isn't working. So I've had a lot of those, and it's more about like, it's time, this is done, it's played out. And also, if you're going to transition into something else, you kind of have to start. Neil Strauss said it beautifully, where if you're on a train that's moving already and you kind of know you want to do this other thing, get this one going, and then when it's appropriate, you can transition. Don't just go like, oh, I'm going to stop and then start again. I'm not suggesting that.
And now's a good time as people reevaluate what really means a lot to them to do that. Gabby, it was such a pleasure to talk with you, and we all really appreciate you taking the time to join us and give us your time.
Well, it's my honor, and I hope everyone is healthy and their families are healthy, and to know that, like, really honestly, challenges and difficulty, that is as much as a part of the whole formula as successes and earnings and all these things. And I think the more we can sort of embrace that, I feel like it just makes the process a lot smoother.
Thank you. And thank you to everyone that participated in today's conversation. You're going to be pushed back to your tables, and you can continue networking if you want to. And if you purchased access to the VIP reception, you may access that with the Zoom link by clicking on the last event sponsor banner on the main floor plan at the bottom of the screen. And thank you all again. Thank you again to Gabby. Have a wonderful rest of your day.